The Morgan house sat at the end of a long gravel drive, hidden from view by tall, ancient trees. Its weathered and warped gray exterior wooden walls and rusty tin roof always looked at once both foreboding and warmly inviting. It had been built in two parts, separated by a covered, creaky dog trot that always seemed to have a cooling breeze, even in the hottest months. I would sit in those dingy, floral-patterned folding seats that had been saved from a movie theater fire and salvaged from a raised church and stare at the worn numbers carved into the wall there. 1930. Carved deeply. And, just above it, a bit less discernible, 1830. I would finger the pocket knife in my jeans. The house had belonged to his family for generations, and he now lived there alone. It had electricity and a telephone connection, but these were its only modern amenities. The loud, startling pounding on the back storm door would alert us that he had arrived. He would visit on Monday or Tuesday evenings, and the open door would reveal him standing there with two items in his hands: his wooden cane, his door-knocking instrument, and the Sunday edition of the Commercial Appeal. After reading it himself, he always gave that newspaper to us, with the comic section, which Robert called the funny papers, separated from the rest and placed at the bottom of the stack where he knew I'd find it more easily. Cartoons like Garfield, the Peanuts, and Bloom County were among the first influences on the young, budding artist that I was at that time. My sister and I were attending a Halloween get-together in 1992. 1992. That means I was 14. For some reason, I thought I was younger. Our father was waiting outside, having arrived to pick us up, and we were on our way out the door when Joan Welch pulled me aside and told me in a hushed tone that Robert had been found on the floor of his home. He had managed to activate the Med-Alert system, but those who arrived were too late to save him. My stomach instantly ached, and I could feel my body beginning to quiver. I remembered a time when, as my father and I were leaving his home, he had said to me, "I love you." And I, unsure how to respond to this, said, "I like you, too." The sounds of the other laughing children playing games and telling stories reached my ear through the wall, and I became infuriated with them. How dare they engage in frivolity when the man who was essentially my third grandfather had been ripped away? I swallowed my rage, storing it away deep in my gut as I stepped out into the cold night. We were 15 or 16 years old. Patrick and Stephen rode over on Stephen's four-wheeler and stopped by to visit me. When living in as rural an area as we did, one of the main sources of outdoor entertainment is to walk the surrounding tree-lined wide expanses of fields, alternately used as cow pastures and for crops, while telling stories of school, naming the girls we found interesting, and talking about future life plans. As we walked that day, we eventually happened upon Robert's land and the house, abandoned now except for occasional visits by the husband of Robert's niece. It was a hot day, a Tennessee summer, and all of our throats were parched. I don't recall who suggested that we get a drink from the well, but I do remember feeling some initial apprehension and not understanding particularly why. The place was empty, and no one was using this well on any kind of regular basis, yet it still felt to me that this was Robert's property, and that we had neither his permission to use it nor any way of procuring it. I overruled my fears, however, in order to join in what seemed was going to happen with or without me as Patrick and Stephen pondered the pulley mechanism. The tin roof above the well was just as rusty as the one over the house. The traditional way in which one often sees a bucket-drawn well portrayed in cartoons or in illustrations of medieval life, with a wide-open abyss ringed by stone masonry, didn't quite apply to Robert's well. Instead of a bucket, there was a long metal tube attached to the rope, and rather than a stone-ringed abyss, there was an opening in the ground, only just wide enough for the tube to enter. We lowered the tube into the ground, feeling it drop for a long time before hearing the echoed splash of the water below. After hoisting it to the surface again, we awkwardly tipped the tube, decanting a small amount of that clear water into a nearby rusty ladle. Passing the ladle amongst ourselves, we poured into our thirsty mouths water so surprisingly cold that it stung our throats. We joked that this was the secret which had allowed Robert to live well into his 80s, and that by drinking in this elixir we had added at least 10 years to our lives. That would be when I noticed the small metal loop that hung from the bottom of the tube. All apprehension had left me at this point, so I reached down, wrapped my hand around the loop, and pulled it downward. Suddenly the entire contents of that container gushed out of the bottom, spilling the water in one swift moment. The ground became instantly drenched, the beige dirt turning a dark brown as the water spread rapidly and sloshed onto our shoes. I stared momentarily at the disarray at my feet in the shadow of that looming, dark, empty house, and suddenly I was a child again. That twisted house, the witness of my violation of Robert's trust. The three of us screamed and dashed away to escape the reproachful stare of the Morgan home. I ran for the entire quarter-mile until I was safe in my bedroom, sitting amongst my myriad scattered pieces of paper covered with self-drawn cartoon characters.